descent into the roses? Who taught the honeybee to dance? Who put the tree inside the acorn? Surely can't be chance. Who made seas and leaves and trees? Who made snow and winds that blow? Who made streams and rivers flow? God made all of these.
From when I was 4 years old till I was about 9, at many not especially religious schools in both England and Germany, I would have to sit cross-legged on the floor in assemblies. With a teacher at the piano, we would sing the words of this song almost daily, proclaiming each and every line as if it were fact. When I was a child, it was just assumed that class assemblies were supposed to have a religious element, and that the unnamed deity that we were praising was specifically the Christian one, even though the children, the teachers, and their parents might not necessarily believe it was just the done thing in those days. I wasn't aware at the time, but my mind was being prepared in order to accept biblical literalism and creationism as the answer to everything. The answers that I proclaimed from this childhood song stuck with me throughout my entire schooling and education. These views were never challenged, not by the politically correct teachers, nor by my friends who themselves were brought up singing the same song. I was satisfied with my explanation for everything, and if there was something I didn't fully understand, I would simply say, God made that, or God did it, and that was enough. And whilst nobody ever challenged my beliefs openly, I never considered that I might be wrong in many of them. When I was 18 years old, I attended a tent revival service held for lots of different local evangelical churches at a nearby abbey. It was about midway through the meeting when things became interesting. Randomly, one by one, across the tent, people started seeing gold dust on their hands and in their Bibles. As they excitedly proclaimed these seemingly miraculous signs, others started to report gold fillings, as if somehow this was the divine dentistry. The pastors all started shining torches into people's mouths and exclaiming that miracles had occurred and that this was a sign that everyone was on God's side. I was looking for signs too, and someone in the group I was with claimed she had gold dust on her hands. On closer inspection of her sweaty palms in the artificial light, I could just about make out a yellow tinge. But looking into her eyes, I could not say that this was not a miracle. Plus, if it was really a miracle, I didn't want to upset the Holy Spirit by saying that these people were just seeing what they wanted to see, instead of what was really there. I just asked God for more faith to help my unbelief. What is truth anyway? When I was a Christian, I would refer to the absolute truth. In other words, Christianity. And not just any Christianity, but my particular brand of non-conformist evangelical Baptist Christianity. Every church I ever attended, and from every Christian leader or pastor, I was lectured in how important it is to be obedient in this life and to accept as absolute literal truth whatever they said, as if their words were God's own words. In order to have respect for myself, I had to at least clear the scientific doubts from my head. At least, all Christians use the same Bible, so I thought I'd start there, with my own Bible study, away from the cell group and the house church, and without the bias of a Christian leader who needs my money to feed their family. Like thousands of times before, I opened the Bible to Genesis 1. However, this time I made a conscious effort to try to keep the confirmation bias away. I read that God created the earth and the sky. So far so good, but then he created day and night before he had created a sun for the light to come from. So it looks like he was working in the dark or from some supernatural torch. God created human beings in the next chapter, but wait, he had already created Adam and Eve and instructed them to have lots of children, and now he was creating another wife? Or the same one? Someone had obviously not proofread their work. But why didn't I see a problem with this before? Then I came to the talking snake. Without my religious glasses on, what is the most likely explanation for this story? I couldn't ignore the fact that almost every recorded human society has had their own explanation for how their land and their people were created. Some of the stories are ancient and rather poetic. Someone from another culture who hears of the Christian creation story for the first time would probably consider Genesis 1 and 2 to be a myth, just like a Christian considers all other creation stories that aren't theirs to be just that, stories. Could my own story be a myth? The tipping point came for me when I started to challenge my own beliefs. I deliberately went out looking for the challenge. I bought books by well-known thinkers, philosophers and scientists, and started watching material on YouTube from atheists to get their point of view. I was still a Christian, but something wasn't right and I felt I needed to know. I began to feel a heavy weight in my stomach as I became insatiably hungry for knowledge. And my desk started accumulating books on popular science, philosophy and of old religions. The age of the Earth was one of the first things that caught my attention. I was never one to believe that the Earth was literally 6,000 years old, but if pressed, I would probably shrug my shoulders and say that it was, based upon adding together all the estimated lifespans of the family trees in the Bible and coming up with a number. I did, however, find mountains of evidence from many sources that are independently verified and don't contradict each other, that support the fact of the age of the Earth at 4.5 billion years, and that humans come from the east coast of Africa at least 100,000 years ago and migrated, in waves, across the globe, and that we evolved from lower orders of creatures, and the pile of evidence is available to us all to read and to test the results. When researching the Christian response to what I'd found, very few, if any, sources actually referred to the science, preferring instead to reference themselves or to some propaganda instead. Now this was a real turn-off. It was becoming clearer to me that while Christian apologetics has changed over the past 2,000 years, the tactics largely haven't. Where scientific evidence does not contradict the Bible, it is usually welcomed and proclaimed as evidence, which it is not, for a particular view of God. Where new evidence may contradict the Bible or tradition, it is banned, attacked, or the discoverer vilified, for example Galileo and Darwin. Where new evidence comes in that shows a natural process, which was once considered supernatural, God gets a little bit smaller. Whenever new evidence comes in to fill a gap in our knowledge, some religious zealots claim that there are now 2 gaps in our knowledge. I repeatedly saw hundreds of examples of Christian organisations blatantly lying to push a religious agenda in spite of the evidence. Every Christian website I turned to was there for one reason alone: to convert people to its particular brand of Christianity, to obtain money or influence, and or to support other Christians in spreading propaganda. Almost all the arguments had a severe logical flaw. None seem able to express an interest in science or humanity for humanity's sake. Evolution was never mentioned when I was growing up. I presume now it was out of fear. Science that brushes against the boundaries of religion or outright refutes chunks of it is always portrayed as evil, as Satan's doing. Yet it became clear to me that if Genesis is not infallible, what about the rest of the Bible? Why is it that every time evidence comes up, which clears up a previously believed religious falsehood or myth or religious lie, that we as religious people are expected to forget that, and yet again trust in the infallibility of the Bible and its priests on every other issue? It was still early days in my deconversion process, but at the end of the day I recognised that I had a book, and I believed it because I was brought up with a restricted education. I knew nothing about Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or even Mormonism or the JWs until I was at least 13 years old. As it turns out, strict adherents of those religions appear to have similar reasons for their belief. They're indoctrinated as children by parents and society and taught to revere an old book as truth, all the while avoiding, or if shown, ignoring, or if challenged, rejecting, without reason, all the evidence and reason that's contrary to their beliefs. Remember the accounts of people finding gold dust grains in their Bibles and in their mouths? It turns out that reality is so much more mysterious and awe-inspiring than fantasy. As it happens, we can calculate the number of stars in the universe, and they far outnumber the number of grains of sand on the entire Earth. Most of these are not directly visible to us, and most of them are travelling away from us at terrific velocities, which begs the question as to why God bothered to create the far distant ones in the first place. Our sun isn't the centre of the universe, and neither are we. It's just a typical middle-aged star on an outer spiral arm in just one of many billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars. Any person of faith who is honestly evaluating their beliefs will reach perhaps the most difficult decision of their lives. It is a crossroads on the journey that requires you to decide. Can you take everything you have known to be true thus far and toss it out the window? You will know the crossroads when you see it. One path is everything you have known, everything you have invested in. The other path is where the evidence leads. It might bring you back to your current road, but you cannot be sure.